Hey guys, welcome back, and today we're on to chapters 7 and 8 of Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald. They're doing some yard work outside, so I hope that noise isn't like too distracting, but I think it will be okay. All right, chapter 7. It was late afternoon when they wound up the discussion as to what Dick should do. He must be most kind and yet eliminate himself. When the doctor stood up at last, Dick's eyes fell outside the window to where the light rain was falling. Nicole was waiting, expectant, somewhere in that rain. When, presently, he went out, buttoning his oilskin at the throat, pulling down the brim of his hat, he came upon her immediately under the roof of the main entrance. "I know a new place we can go," she said. "When I was ill, I didn't mind sitting inside with the others in the evening. What they said seemed like everything else. Naturally now I see them as ill, and you'll be leaving soon." "Oh, soon. My sister Beth, but she's always been called Baby. She's coming in a few weeks to take me somewhere. After that I'll be back here for a last month." "The older sister?" "Oh, quite a bit older. She's 24. She's very English. She lives in London with my father's sister. She was engaged to an Englishman, but he was killed. I never saw him." Her face, ivory gold against the blurred sunset that strove through the rain, had a promise Dick had never seen before. The high cheekbones, the faintly wan quality, cool rather than feverish, was reminiscent of the frame of a promising colt, a creature whose life did not promise to be only a projection of youth upon a grayer screen, but instead a true glowing. The face would be handsome in middle life. It would be handsome in old age. The essential structure and the economy were there. "What are you looking at?" "I was just thinking that you're going to be rather happy." Nicole was frightened. "Am I? All right, things couldn't be worse than they have been." In the covered woodshed to which she had led him, she sat cross-legged upon her golf shoes, her Burberry wound about her cheeks, stung alive by the damp air. Gravely she returned his gaze, taking in his somewhat proud carriage that never quite yielded to the wooden post against which he leaned. She looked into his face that always tried to discipline itself into molds of attentive seriousness, her excursions into joys and mockeries of its own. That part of him which seemed to fit the reddish-Irish coloring she knew least, she was afraid of it, yet more anxious to explore. This was his more masculine side. The other part, the trained part, the consideration in the polite eyes, she explorated without question, as most women did. "At least this institution has been good for languages," said Nicole. "I've spoken French with 2 doctors, and German with the nurses, and Italian or something like it with a couple of scrub women and one of the patients, and I've been picked up a lot of Spanish from another." "That's fine." He tried to arrange an attitude, but no logic seemed forthcoming. "Music, too. Hope you didn't think I was only interested in ragtime. I practice every day. The last few months I've been taking a course in Zurich on the history of music. In fact, it was all that kept me going at times, music and the drawing." She leaned suddenly and twisted a loose strip from the sole of her shoe, then looked up. "I'd like to draw you just the way you are now." It made him sad when she brought out her accomplishments for his approval. "I envy you. At work, I don't seem to be interested in anything except my work." "Oh, I think that's fine for a man," she said quickly. "But for a girl, I think she ought to have lots of minor accomplishments and pass them on to her children." "I suppose so," said Dick with deliberated indifference. Nicole sat quiet. Dick wished she could speak so he could play the easy role of wet blanket, but now she sat quiet. "You're all well," he said. "Try to forget the past. Don't overdo things for a year or so. Go back to America and be a debutante and fall in love and be happy." "I couldn't fall in love." Her injured shoe scraped a cocoon of dust from the log on which she sat. "Sure you can," Dick insisted. "Not for a year maybe, but sooner or later." Then he added brutally, "You can have a perfectly normal life with a household of beautiful descendants." I'm all the way across the house where you could somehow still hear it loudly, but hopefully it's a little better than it was. "The very fact that you can make a complete comeback at your age proves that the precipitating factors were pretty near everything. Young women, you'll be pulling your weight long after your friends are carried off screaming. But there was a look of pain in her eyes as she took the rough dose, the harsh reminder. I know I wouldn't be fit to marry anyone for a long time, she said humbly. Dick was too upset to say any more. He looked out into the grain field, trying to recover his hard, brassy attitude. You'll be all right. Everybody here believes in you. Why, Dr. Gregory is so proud of you that he'll probably... I hate Dr. Gregory. Well, you shouldn't. Nicole's world had fallen to pieces, but it was only a flimsy and scarcely created world. Beneath it, her emotions and instincts spot on. Was it an hour ago she had waited by the entrance, wearing her hope like a corsage at her belt? Dress stay crisp for him, buttons stay put, bloom narcissus, air stay still and sweet. It will be nice to have fun again, she fumbled on. For a moment she entertained a desperate idea of telling him how rich she was, what big house she lived in, that really she was a valuable property. For a moment she made herself into her grandfather, Sid Warren, the horse trader. But she survived the temptation to confuse all values and shut these matters into their Victorian side chambers, even though there was no home left to her, save emptiness and pain. I have to go back to the clinic. It's not raining now. Dick walked beside her, feeling her unhappiness and wanting to drink the rain that touched her cheek. I have some new records, she said. I can hardly wait to play them. Do you know? After supper that evening, Dick thought he would finish the break. He wanted to kick Franz's bottom for having partially introduced him to such a sordid business. He waited in the hall. His eyes followed a Barrett, not wet with waiting like Nicole's Barrett, but covering a skull recently operated on. Beneath it, human eyes peered, found him, and came over. Bonjour, doctor. Bonjour, monsieur. Il fait beau temps. Oui, merveilleux. Vous êtes ici maintenant? Non pour la journée seulement. Ah, bon. Alors, au revoir, monsieur. Glad at having survived another contact, the wretch in the Barrett moved away. Dick waited. Presently, a nurse came downstairs and delivered him a message. Miss Warren asked to be excused, doctor. She wants to lie down. She wants to have dinner upstairs tonight. The nurse hung on his response, half expecting him to imply that Miss Warren's attitude was pathological. Oh, I see. Well, he rearranged the flow of his own saliva, the pulse of his heart. I hope she feels better. Thanks. He was puzzled and discontent. At any rate, it freed him. Leaving a note for Franz begging off from supper, he walked through the countryside to the tram station. As he reached the platform, with the spring twilight gliding the rails and glass in the slot machines, he began to feel that the station, the hospital, was hovering between being centripetal and centrifugal. He felt frightened. He was glad that he had substantial cobblestones of Zurich clicked once more under his shoes. He expected to hear from Nicole the next day, but there was no word. Wondering if she was ill, he called the clinic and talked to Franz. She came downstairs to lunch yesterday and today, said Franz. She seemed a little abstracted and in the clouds. How did it go off? Dick tried to plunge over the alpine crevice between the sexes. We didn't get to it. At least, I didn't think we did. I tried to be distant, but I didn't think enough happened to change her attitude if it ever went deep. Perhaps his vanity had been hurt that there was no coup de grace to administer. From some things she said to her nurse, I'm inclined to think she understood. All right. It was the best thing that could have happened. She doesn't seem over-agitated, only a little in the clouds. All right, then. Dick, come soon and see me. Chapter 8. During the next weeks, Dick experienced a vast dissatisfaction. The pathological origin and mechanistic defeat of the affair left a flat and metallic taste. Nicole's emotions had been used unfairly. What if they turned out to have been his own? Necessarily, he must absent himself from Felicity a while. In dreams, he saw her walking on the clinic path, swinging her wide straw hat. One time he saw her in person. As he walked past the Palace Hotel, a magnificent rose curved into the half-moon entrance. Small within its gigantic proportions, and buoyed up by the power of 100 superfluous horses, sat Nicole and a young woman whom he assumed was her sister. Nicole saw him, and momentarily her lips parted in an expression of fright. Dick shifted his hat and passed, yet for a moment the air around him was loud, and the circling of all the goblins on the gross monster. He tried to write the matter out of his mind in a memorandum that went into detail as to the solemn regimen before her, the possibilities of another push of the malady under the stresses which the world would inevitably supply, and all a memorandum that would have been convincing to anyone save to him who had written it. The total value of his emotions were involved. Thenceforth he resolutely provided antidotes. One was the telephone girl from Bon-sur-Aube, now touring Europe from Nice to Koblenz, and a desperate roundup of men she's known in her never-to-be-equaled holiday. Another was the making of arrangements to get home on a government transport in August. A third was a consequent intensification of work on his proofs for the book that this autumn was to be presented to the German-speaking world of psychiatry. Dick had outgrown the book. He wanted now to do more spade work. If he got an exchange fellowship, he could count on plenty of routine. Meanwhile, he had projected a new work, an attempt at a uniform and pragmatic classification of the neurosis and psychosis, based on an examination of 1,500 pre-Kaplan and post-Kaplan cases, as they would be diagnosed in the terminology of the different contemporary schools, and such sonorous paragraph, together with a chronology of such subdivisions of opinion as have arisen independently. The title would look monumental in German. Going into Montreux, Dick pedaled slowly, gaping at the Jugenhorn whenever possible, and blinded by glimpses of the lake through the alleys of the Shores Hotel. He was conscious of the groups of English, emergent after 4 years and walking with detective story suspicion in their eyes, as though they were about to be assaulted in this questionable country by German-trained bands. There were building and awakening everywhere, on this mound of debris formed by a mountain of torrent. At Bern and at Lausanne, on the way south, Dick had been eagerly asked if there would be Americans this year. By August, if not in June. He wore leather shorts and an army shirt, mountain shoes. In his knapsack were a cotton suit and a change of underwear. At the Gillen funicular, he checked his bicycle and took a small beer on the terrace of the station buffet, meanwhile watching the little bug crawl down the 80-degree slope of the hill. His ear was full of dried blood from La Tour de Pels, where he had sprinted under the impression that he was a spoiled athlete. He asked for alcohol and cleared up the exterior while the funicular slid down port. He saw his bicycle embarked, slung his knapsack into the lower compartment of the car, and followed it in. A mountain climbing cars are built on a slant similar to the angle of a hat brim of a man who doesn't want to be recognized. As water gushed from the chamber under the car, Dick was impressed with the ingenuity of the whole idea. A complimentary car was now taking on mountain water at the top and would pull the lightened car up by gravity, as soon as the brakes were released. It must have been a great inspiration. In the seat across, a couple of British were discussing the cable itself. The ones made in England always last 5 or 6 years. 2 years ago, the Germans underbid us. And how long do you think their cable lasted? How long? 1 year and 10 months. Then the Swiss sold it to the Italians. They don't have rigid inspections of cables. I could see it would be a terrible thing for Switzerland if a cable broke. The conductor shut the door. He telephoned his confrère among the Undaliti, and with a jerk the car had pulled upward, heading for a pinpoint on an emerald hill above. After it cleared the low roofs, the skies of Vaud, Valais, Swiss, Savoy, and Geneva spread around the passengers in cyclorama. On the center of the lake, cooled by the piercing current of the Rhone, lay the true center of the Western world. Upon it floated swans like boats and boats like swans, both lost in the nothingness of the heartless beauty. It was a bright day, with sun glittering on the grass. On the grass beach below and the white quartz of the Crucial. The figures on the quartz threw no shadows. When Chillon and the island place of Salagon came into view, Dick turned his eyes inward. The funicular was above the highest houses on the shore. On both sides, a tangle of foliage and flowers culminated in intervals in masses of color. It was a railside garden, and in the car was a sign, Defense des Couleurs les Fleurs. Though one must not pick flowers on the way up, the blossom trailed in as they passed. Dorothy Perkins' roses dragged patiently through each compartment, slowly waggling with the motion of the funicular, letting go at the last to swing back to their rosy cluster. Again and again these branches went through the car. In the compartment above and in front of Dick's, a group of English were standing up and exclaiming from the backdrop of the sky when suddenly there was a confusion among them. They parted to give passage to a couple of young people who made apologies and scrambled over into the rear compartment of the funicular, Dick's compartment. The young man was a Latin with the eyes of a stuffed deer. The girl was Nicole. The two climbers gasped momentarily from their efforts. As they settled into the seats, laughing and crowding the English to the corners, Nicole said, "Hello." She was lovely to look at. Immediately Dick saw that something was different. In a second he realized it was her fine spun hair, bobbed like Irene Castle's and fluffed into curls. She wore a sweater of powder blue and a white tennis skirt. She was the first morning in May, and every taint of the clinic was departed. "Plunk," she gasped. "Woo, that guard. They'll arrest us at the next stop. Dr. Dever, the Comte de Marmore." Jiminy, she felt her new hair, panting. "Sister bought first-class tickets. It's a matter of principle with her." She and Marmora exchanged glances and shouted. Then we found that first class in the hearse part behind the chauffeur, shut in with curtains for a rainy day so you can't see anything. But Sister's very dignified. Again, Nicole and Marmora laughed with young intimacy. "Where are you bound?" asked Dick. You too?" Nicole looked at his costume. "That's your bicycle they got up in front?" "Yes, I'm going to coast down Monday." "With me on your handlebars? I mean, really, will you? I can't think of more fun." "But I will carry you down in my arms," Marmora protested intensely. "I will roller skate you, or I will throw you and you will fall slowly like a feather." The delight in Nicole's face, to be a feather again instead of a plummet, to float and not to drag. She was a carnival to watch, at times primly coy, posing, grimacing, and gesturing. Sometimes the shadow fell and the dignity of old suffering flowed down into her fingertips. Dick wished himself away from her, fearing that he was a reminder of a world well left behind. He resolved to go back to the other hotel. When the funicular came to rest, those new to it stirred in suspension between the blues of two heavens. It was merely for a mysterious exchange between the conductor of the car going up and the conductor of the car coming down. Then up over a forest path and a gorge, then again up a hill that became solid with narcissus, from passengers to sky. The people in Montreux played tennis in the lakeside courts were pinpoints now. Something new was in the air, freshness embodying itself in a music as the car slid into Gillen and they heard the orchestra in the hotel garden. When they changed to the mountain train, the music was drowned by the rushing water released from the hydraulic chamber. Almost overhead was Caux, where the 1,000 windows of a hotel burned in the late sun. But the approach was different. A leather-lunged engine pushed the passengers round and round in a corkscrew, mounting, rising. They chugged through the low-level clouds, and for a moment Dick lost Nicole's face in the spray of the slanting donkey engine. They skirted a lost streak of wind, with the hotel growing in size at each spiral, until with a vast surprise they were there, on top of the sunshine. In the confusion of arrival, as Dick slung his knapsack and started forward on the platform to get his bicycle, Nicole was beside him. "Aren't you at our hotel?" she asked. "I'm economizing." "Will you come down and have dinner?" Some confusion with baggage ensued. "This is my sister, Dr. Diver from Zurich." Dick bowed to a young woman of 25, tall and confident. She was both formidable and vulnerable, he decided, remembering other women with flower-like mouths grooved for bits. "I'll drop in after dinner," Dick promised. "First I must get acclimated." He wheeled off his bicycle, feeling Nicole's eyes following him, feeling her helpless first love, feeling it twist around inside him. He went 300 yards up the slope to the other hotel. He engaged a room and found himself washing without a memory of the intervening 10 minutes. Only a sort of drunken flush pierced with voices, unimportant voices that he did not know how much he was loved. All right, that's the end of chapter 8. So, looks like he tried to leave her, but he didn't actually try to leave her because he's still in love with her. But she seems, it's just not healthy. Like, if you're, like, had a mental health crisis, you should not be with your doctor. It's not her fault, obviously. It's his fault, but anyway, also a little thing to point out. So when Nicole asked Dick, "Aren't you at our hotel?" he said, "I'm economizing." And that's the same thing way back at the beginning when Rosemary and Nicole were driving. After they went shopping, they were in the car together. She was telling her a story about how she switched to a smaller hotel, and she was like, "But we just like to tell people we were economizing." So just a little link there. And we also, her mother died when she was young. So when she probably talks like from her trauma and stuff, Nicole doesn't really like remember things how they were, which is sad. But yeah, just a little thing to point out because a lot of people miss that little detail. Anyway, see you next time. Bye. Mwah.